All right, we're going to wait a couple minutes as everybody filters in here, as they will. All right. And happy Friday afternoon, everyone. Or depending on where you're from, maybe it's still morning there. Wow. All right. Since we're at 3:02, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome and thanks for joining us for our first artist talk of the semester. My name is Erica Kwam and I'm the interim director here at Purdue Galleries. Today we're speaking with Amir H. Fallah, whose work is currently on display in Ringel Gallery through Friday, February 12th, so a week from today. Get over to see it. Just a few quick things before we get started. Obviously we are recording, so I'll be keeping you on mute for the duration of the talk even. We'll be doing a live Q&A at the end. So if you want to enter any questions you have into chat, that's great. And I'll read them out later, or you'll have the chance to ask Amir yourself at the end of the talk. We'll be having this session available on our exhibitions page later in case you missed part of it. And you can find that at purdue.edu/galleries. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce our exhibiting artist, Amir H. Fallah. Amir lives and works in Los Angeles, California, and is joining us from his studio. I'm also excited to announce that Purdue has purchased one of his works from the current exhibition titled All Experiences in Arc. So if you get over to see the exhibition, that one's going to stay with us after this. So Amir, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Erica. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Let's see. Let me share my screen. So let's see. All right. So I wanted to keep it fairly casual. So if any of you have any questions about anything in the middle of us talking, or in the middle of me talking, just feel free to, just unmute yourself and ask me whatever questions you might have, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. So I thought I would start with, I'm going to go back about 10 years. And the first body of work I started making is these figurative paintings where I really was thinking about the history of portraiture. Historically, portraiture has been a way that we, it's a way that we describe someone's physical features. So what they look like, whether they're male or female, young or old, attractive or not. And I realized that those things don't really describe who someone is. They don't really tell you much information about who they are. And they can often be very misleading. And I had this idea because my entire life, I was born in Iran, but I grew up in America. And for an Iranian, I'm a very dark-skinned Iranian. So when I lived on the East Coast, a lot of people assumed I was Indian. And when I moved to LA, sometimes people would think I was Mexican. And then also my wife is Puerto Rican, but she has bright red hair, pale skin, and she looks Irish. So the experience of me growing up in the States and then also meeting my wife about 16, 17 years ago and hearing how she was kind of misidentified culturally her entire life kind of set me on this path of thinking about portraiture and like what it means to show someone's face and how can you take this long history of portraiture and kind of turn it on its head. And the idea that I came up with was I was like, well, what would it be like if we didn't show somebody's physical likeness? What if there was a way to conceal it somehow and describe them in an alternative way? And so I came up with this process of going to my subject's home and almost doing an archaeological dig of their lives where we would speak about their family, the personal possessions that they surrounded themselves in. So like, for instance, in this in this painting, I went into this guy's home, and he had this duck decoy uh, sitting on a shelf. And I started asking him about the duck decoy, and it turned up that he grew up in the Midwest, and his father and uncles were avid hunters. And, this was just something that he brought to Los Angeles from the Midwest home. And then he had these, I don't know if you can see it in the bottom left corner, he had this jar high up on a shelf filled with all these eyeball chocolates. You guys know what I'm talking about? Those like candy chocolates that are wrapped in eyeball foil. And this is like two grown men that live in this house. I'm like, why do you guys have these eyeball chocolates? And he's like, oh, well, my boyfriend loves chocolate, and I bought these for him because he loves them, but I have to hide them from him like he's a little kid, because he'll just eat all of them. And so this is something that he was like, why do you even want to put these like chocolates into the painting? But for me, I thought these very mundane, this mundane object was really charged with like a history and memory of their interactions, and their relationship and how they interact with one another. So I'm looking for things like this, these everyday objects that are embedded with these histories or meanings. And so I create a still life of sorts, and I always put the figure in the center. And the easiest way to just cover the face is to throw either like a piece of clothing or a fabric or a quilt over them. So for instance, in this painting, this is a entire family. It's 4 people. And so a lot of people think that these figures are, because they're kind of veiled in these fabrics, they immediately assume, especially with my background, that they're Muslim, paintings of Muslim women, which they're not. This is a family that's half Filipino, half Mexican, and it's male and female figures. And as you can see, I almost generalized the bodies. The bodies, there's no tattoos. They're almost made generic. And I do that on purpose because to me, the physical features of these people are like the least interesting things about them. So the body almost functions as a skeleton or like as a ghost of the figure, so that you can focus on everything else happening in the painting. And I chose this kind of like orangish yellow skin tone because for me it felt, I've done other ones earlier on where the skin color was, like black and white or kind of like in a bluish hue. And I found that color made them look kind of dead, and I didn't want to steer the viewer in that direction. So I wanted this color that felt very alive, that was almost exuding energy or sense of life. And so most of the paintings have these kind of like homogeneous orangish yellow skin to them. And here's two simpler works. I kind of call these the high school portrait format, where it's kind of like waist up. And in these paintings, usually the figures are holding like one object. So for instance, in the figure on the right, in the pink painting, she's holding her first camera. She's a filmmaker and photographer. And she got into photography as a teenager. And she had this camera that takes 4 pictures at once and combines them. So it's a novelty camera. And it's actually broken, but it's this object that kind of reminded her of where she came from and how she got involved in her profession. So she just can't bear to let it go. And on the figure on the left, I believe the subject is of Bosnian descent, and this kind of stick with this horse face is a piece of folk art that she bought in Bosnia and she's had since she was a kid. And again, it's this thing that isn't worth a lot of money, but for her, there's a strong connection to her culture, to the trip of going to Bosnia and kind of chasing down her roots. So every object, every pattern, every fabric is embedded with some sort of history or meaning. Nothing is random. So the figure on the left, the tapestry that she's covered in, is actually a kilim rug that was in her kitchen. That was really beautiful that I photographed. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. So this is a museum show at the Nerman Museum of Art in right outside of Kansas City in Overland, Kansas. And for this show, I'd been painting a lot of people that I knew, and I thought, what would it be like to paint a complete stranger? And so the museum director introduced me to this man who lives in Kansas City, who is a avid cactus and succulent collector. So every year he keeps all these cactuses in pots, and every winter when it starts getting cold, he brings all 300 potted plants into his home. So he's quite the eccentric, and he decorates his entire house with these cactuses. He has special grow lights that he keeps these cactuses alive. And I realized that he's become this caretaker. He doesn't have children, but these cactuses have become his children, because without his help to keep them alive during winter, they would all die outside. So for me, this became, this guy's like bizarre hobby / obsession for me turned into this a metaphor for taking care of your loved ones and the extremes that we go to take care of those that are important in our lives. And so in the center of the show is this like 13-foot structure that functions as a terrarium. And for the show, he let me borrow about 30 of his actual plants. And so I actually collaborated with him, and the plants in the show are his. And those lamps that you see on those tables kind of strewn along the walls are actual grow lights. That's where the color comes from. So those lights are the only things that keeping these plants alive in this indoor climate. And so every painting in this show is of him. So these 3 paintings are portraits of him, and in each one he's holding one of his most prized cactuses. And when I went to his home, he had all these amazing needlepoint pillows all around his house, kind of vintage 60s. You can kind of see one in the bottom right corner. And so I asked him, what are these pillows from? And he said, oh, my mother, when she was alive, she did needlepoint embroidery. And these are all pillows that she made. And when she died, I kept all of them. And, they're in every room. And it's a way of keeping her presence around me. So these aren't his mother's pillows, but I went to eBay and I bought these pillows, and they're kind of strewn throughout the installation for people to sit at or lean on. Here's another installation shot. So after that show, this is at the Schneider Museum of Art in Ashland, Oregon, and I started reading about the history of the painter Henry Rousseau. And Henry Rousseau is really interesting because he was a pathological liar. He was a self-taught artist. He was a criminal. He went to jail for fraud. And he was never accepted as part of the academy because he was self-taught. So even though during his life, artists such as Picasso were infatuated with his work, they didn't fully accept him into the art world because he wasn't part of the academy. He wasn't allowed to exhibit in salons and things of that nature. And so I started reading about his biography, and his biography was completely fascinating. He made these incredible paintings of these lush jungle scenes. And he would tell everybody that he was in the French military and he had been to the jungles of Mexico. And that's where he had seen these lush tropical images of the rainforests in Mexico. And he had seen the natives battling man versus beast in the jungle. And when he died, they actually found out that he had never left Paris. He was never in the French military. He'd never been to Mexico, and his paintings are complete fiction. And they found stacks of ticket stubs and brochures to the local, what's it called? The local, not a planetarium, botanical gardens in France. And so all of those jungle scenes were actually appropriated from plants that he had seen in his travels. And in a lot of his paintings, he would have symbols of travel in the painting. So he would have hot air balloons a airplane and a dirigible all in the sky in one painting. He would often paint boats and ships because he was poor. He could never escape his own harsh reality. So his entire life was about escapism and using his art to travel to these wonderful places and experience things. So in a way, he was very ahead of his own time because the way he was making his images was very innovative, and it's very much similar to how I make my work. He was collaging and appropriating images. It's very similar to how contemporary artists work, but he was just too far ahead of his time. So anyway, so I made a series of paintings that don't have any figures in them, but I consider them all portraits of Rousseau. So the painting on the right-hand side is this hand pulling back this theater curtain. And he was a failed playwright. So he would write these plays too, and he would submit them to theaters and no one would perform them. So it's this hand pulling back this curtain, and crashed in the middle of this like lush jungle is this dirigible, this blimp that's crashed. So I started creating these narratives in my mind, pretending to be him, like that he had like taken this journey to these jungles. His plane or his dirigible crashed, and he walked out, and that's where he saw these fantastical scenes. So I was using his biography as a starting point to make these paintings about his life. And a curtain is covered with a Mexican pattern, needlepoint pattern, that's specific to the time that he said he traveled to Mexico. And all throughout the show is this floor-to-ceiling wallpaper. And for the wallpaper, I knew I wanted some sort of graphic that kind of tied the whole room together. And I thought to myself, what would Henry Rousseau do if he was alive today? How would he create his paintings? And I was like, he would just use Google. That would be the most obvious way to do it. So I went into Google and I typed in Mexican rainforest. And the first 4 images that showed up, I took them in Photoshop. I spliced them together so they looked seamless. And I put this kind of blue filter over them. So you can see it looks seamless. It looks like it's a panoramic view of a jungle. In fact, none of these photos are actually from Mexico because Google's algorithm doesn't work that way. So it's a complete fiction, but it looks like it's real. And they're from different locations. So you would walk in this room and you'd think this is one image of a jungle, but in reality, it's like this collage of multiple jungles from all over the world. And so again, even the way the walls are treated is kind of like a homage to the way his brain was working and how he was putting together his own reality within his work. This is a this is a show that I had in Dubai at Third Line Gallery, and this show was all about. The show was called Almost Home, and Dubai is a place that I've been to a lot, and it's one of the only places I've ever felt at home, and that's because in Iran in Dubai there's a lot of Iranians that are expats that live there. And it's a Middle Eastern country, but it's more free and open compared to Iran. So when I go there, I feel very at home because there's like very similar looking people as me, but it still doesn't feel right. And so this show had a series of portraits of American Iranian immigrants who live in America who can't or don't travel back to Iran for like political reasons or, for whatever reason. So, the idea was that I would make this series of paintings that would be placeholders for these people so that they could have this sense of like almost going back home too, this comforting feeling of going home. And on the walls is Persian calligraphy, and it's the lyrics to the song Homeward Bound. Which is a very iconic American song. And, but it's translated into Farsi through Google Translate. So again, I use Google as a way to kind of bridge these two different cultures together. But as many of you know, like Google Translate does a terrible job at translating text. So a lot of Iranians came to the opening and they were like, this text makes no sense. It's like broken Farsi. But that's what the piece was about. It was about trying to get back home, but still not being quite there. So like using Google Translate as a way to communicate, but you're still kind of falling short. It's never cohesive and it's never clear. And for me, that's like a metaphor for how I grew up, where I'm kind of in cultural limbo. I grew up in America, but in America, nobody really considers me fully American. And if I went back to Iran, I wouldn't be considered Iranian. I'm kind of in this, I'm a cultural hybrid, kind of stuck between these two worlds. Just like this text is kind of, it's somewhere between classic American song and Persian poetry, and neither one of them fit quite right. Let's see. So, so then I started breaking up the spaces in the paintings and thinking about how I could kind of push these figures further. And so I started not only taking images from somebody's home, but I started also appropriating images from based on our conversation. So in this painting, this is a painting of a friend who's Lithuanian or Lithuanian American. She grew up here, but still goes back to Lithuania, and she was born there. And during our conversation, she was telling me about traditional, she knows I'm really into patterning and textiles, and I paint a lot of them. And she was like, you have to check out Lithuanian traditional dress. It's really these bold, beautiful colors and patterns, but she didn't have any examples of it. So I went home and I started researching online about traditional Lithuanian dress or folk dress from Lithuania. And after hours of researching, I came across these vintage 1950s illustrations of these like farmhouse, farm workers from, the countryside of Lithuania. And that's what the image at the bottom left is. So this kind of pushed me in a new direction, where I started using images to talk about a person that didn't necessarily come from their home, but it was connected to their background or their history or based on some sort of conversation that we had. So it was one step removed. This is a painting from the same era. This is a painting of a Polish friend. This is a large painting. It's about 6 by 15 feet. Painting of a Vietnamese American friend. Another one from that series. So this one, it's 3 people. It's a husband and wife and their young daughter. And the husband is Chinese American. The wife is Brazilian. And I have this young daughter named Gala. And I always assumed Gala was a Brazilian name. For whatever reason, I assumed that it was that. So when I was photographing them, I was like, oh, what does Gala mean? And, what's the meaning of the name? And they're like, oh, it's the name of Salvador Dali's wife. And I was like, what? They're like, yeah, it's a Spanish name. And I was like, why did you name her Gala? And they were like, well, we always loved this cookbook that Salvador Dali did with his wife. And the book is called Les Dinner de Gala, which is the cover of the book is featured in the middle with that face. And it's like a surrealist cookbook. And they just loved this book so much. And they would look at it when they first started dating. So they named their daughter that. So that was something, these are very close friends of mine, but even that fact about their kid, I didn't know. So a lot of times I don't know, when I go in, I don't know what the painting is going to look like. And based on a conversation, I'll just go totally into the left field. And now there's, Salvador Dali is influencing this painting about people that have nothing to do with Dali. This painting is about 8 by 6 feet. And these are just photos of an installation shots of a show that I had at MoCA Tucson. It was a survey of my show, of my work over the last 10 years in Tucson, just so you can get a sense of the scale of the paintings. Many of them are quite large. So this painting right here is about 7 by 15 feet. So 3 tandas. These are about 6 feet in diameter each, so quite large. And then this is another part of my work. So I do quite a bit of outdoor projects. So this is actually on the facade of Mocha Tucson. It's a mural. And I'll talk about these botanical paintings in a second. I'll show some more photos and it'll explain these, but we don't have that much time. So I'm gonna just not talk too much about these, but this is a mural in Lancaster, California, commissioned by the Museum of Art and History in Lancaster. This is a large mural. It's about 10 by 27 feet. This is for Facebook's headquarters in Los Angeles. And the key hole in the center, the world map, that's a heart, and the bird cage are all painted on pieces of wood that come off the wall. So they're kind of like these relief sculptures. You can kind of get a sense of them there. There's just my studio. Let's see. So, so I'm going to jump forward. So this is brand new work. This is work I started making at the beginning of 2020, right before the pandemic. So I'd been making these veiled figure portraits for quite a while. And I started thinking to myself, how could I take this idea of what a portrait can be and push it even further? And maybe I can turn the lens back onto myself and make a body of work that's that functions as self-portraits in a way. Around this time, I was also thinking about children's books that I was reading to my son. And for the first time, I realized, my son's 5 years old, and I realized that children books, I had always thought of them as ways to entertain young kids. But once I had a child, I realized that children's books are actually a way that we communicate our belief systems, our values. We teach empathy to kids. They're a teaching tool. They're the first introduction to your family's values to a young kid. And I thought that was interesting. So I started photographing books out of my son's, or illustrations out of my son's children's books. I also started going through these digital archives from various museums and libraries. So like the Tate Museum has a huge digital archive. And I just looked for images, both new and old, that I thought were interesting or they piqued, I found them, I connected with on some level. And so I created this archive of thousands of just images, old and new, from, all over the world, high and low references. And so these paintings, I began each painting with a line of text. So this painting is called No Gods, No Masters, which is a protest chant, an anarchist protest chant from the early 1900s. But it's also a chant that, everyone from labor unions to human rights people to Antifa, a lot of different groups appropriate this chant and use it as a form of protest. So in the paintings I'm about to show you, each one starts with a line of text. And that line of text is some sort of life lesson, warning, parable that I want to pass on to my son, or is like something that I think is important. So, you can read it literally, like no God, like there's no guy in the sky, or no masters, but a God or a master could be your job. It could be a bully that's keeping you down. It could be a family member that's abusive, that's trying to control you or manipulate you. So I'm not necessarily talking about religion, but I'm talking about these larger, kind of broader themes. So these three men flying on a magic carpet. Growing up in America, I got teased often and was, I was called Aladdin. People asked me if I got to America on my dad's magic carpet. These very kind of just childish teasing and kind of bullying that left a big impression on me growing up about kind of feeling like a second-class citizen or not belonging. And then you have this angel at the bottom left corner that's taken from a Persian miniature. He's kind of sounding these three men on on the flying carpet, and above them is the NASA logo. And so in my mind, I started thinking about how, in a lot of people's minds, they think of like, not just Iranian, but just like Middle Eastern technology, like they probably think like Iran's NASA team like looks like this. They're like flying on carpets, like this very stereotypical backwards kind of view of, you know, people in Iran and in the Middle East. And right around the time that I was making this, actually one of the head scientists at JPL was Iranian, and he was all over the news because he had a mohawk, and he became this like famous, you know, space engineer. And, you know, so I was thinking about themes like this. And then you have this figure in the bottom, she's putting on lipstick and she's very fashionable, but then she's casting the shadow of like a devil. It's kind of hard to tell in the photo, but it's got that shadow has little horns. So it's a symbol of not being really able to tell what's in somebody's heart or what somebody's intentions are. Somebody can be really beautiful, but be really ugly in the inside, or vice versa. So there's a detail of that. Another detail. This is a large painting. This is 8 by 6 feet. And one thing about the way that these paintings are, if you notice, they're kind of constructed in this kind of grid box format. And that's referencing several things. It's referencing the history of abstract, even though these paintings are very maximal and dense, I'm really thinking like the way they're structured is actually structured more like minimalist painting. You know, if you think of like somebody like Frank Stella, I'm using these very basic grids and compositional cues from American art history to put them together. But also I grew up in my early 20s, I published an art magazine called Beautiful Decay, and I did all the design and layout. And in books and publications and newspapers, there's this invisible grid that creates a hierarchy for the image. So everything is built on this grid so that you can have a lot of information, but still be able to decipher it. So if you go to like the front page of the New York Times, you know, the title's always at the top, then there's a main image, then there's the article, then there might be a related article in the, you know, bottom left corner. And these paintings function in that same way, where the images, some of them are directly related to each other, some of them are slightly related, and some of the images might connect to the painting that's sitting next to it. And it's a way to format the painting so that you can have these very dense paintings with imagery that's from all over the world and from all different periods of art, and also have different types of art. So you can have like this top left image. Let me see if I have a detail of it. I don't. So in the top left image is this image of Christopher Columbus that's taken from the 17th century. You can have that on the same page as this Mexican, like cheap Mexican poster for like a flea market at the bottom left corner. And they can live in the same world. It creates this, like there's no hierarchy as far as like high and low art, old or new, east and west. They're all kind of put into this like big melting pot and given a structure so that they can coexist. So this painting is called Remember My Child, Nowhere is Safe. And ironically, I made this painting right before COVID. And I was thinking about like colonialism and my wife being Puerto Rican and how her ancestor were the Taino Indians who were killed by Christopher Columbus. And then COVID hit, and, you know, the painting had a completely different meaning to me about, you know, now things really didn't feel safe. There's a detail of it. So you can see the text. So some of the text is upside down. So you can see the word safe in there. It's kind of woven into, the text is woven into these textiles. So the text isn't the first thing that you see when you see the paintings. They kind of emerge out of the paintings. If you look back, see at the very top right, it says, Remember My Child, in that kind of green paisley pattern. And the bottom, upside down, it says, Nowhere is Safe. Oops, sorry. How much time do we have, Erica? I don't know. Am I running out?
You're doing pretty well. We're at 3:35, so another 15 minutes. till
Okay.
questions.
This painting's large. It's called Sentiment Without Action is the Ruin of the Soul. And this painting is about kind of the environmental crisis that we're in, how really everybody wants to take some sort of action, but they don't know which way to go. And we're kind of being pulled in two different directions. So you have this cowboy in the center that's kind of Rorschached or doubled, and he's being pulled in opposite direction. So he's stirring up a lot of dust, but he's not going anywhere. Or you have this image of this etching from the 16th century in the top left corner of this man falling backwards with this dirty earth, and there's gold coins falling out of his pocket. So that could be like a metaphor for, a lobbyist, a corporate person that's trying to buy his way out of, doing the right thing. And then you have in the bottom, on the left-hand side, you have the cover art for the movie Metropolis, which is, famous, iconic movie. And that movie was about this apocalyptic future where the working class worked underground to serve the very few that were rich and wealthy and powerful. And, that movie is pretty much, in some ways happening now, where we're at this like very critical moment where we have to do something, but nobody knows what to do. So I'm really taking all these very disparate images from different parts of the world, from high and low, from art history and pop culture, and trying to somehow make them live together and kind of tell some sort of narrative or story. Just a couple of details. This is a large painting. It's 7 feet tall by 20 feet long. And this painting is called Science is the Antidote, Superstition is the Disease. And it sounds like it's about COVID, but actually I made this painting. I designed it well over before COVID ever hit. And I was finishing it as we were in lockdown, which was surreal. But really this painting is about the denial of science and how people are much more likely to believe in superstition than they are to listening to somebody that has spent their entire life kind of studying a field, an expert. And so in the center, there's this 16th century map of the world that I repainted. And in this map for me symbolizes the issue that most people have with science. So science for me is almost the exact opposite of religion. Religion is fairly static. There's a set of rules and beliefs. You believe in them, and over time, it's not supposed to change. Now, we all know they change. It does change. Churches and the Pope can make they can decide things, or Muslim clerics make decrees and they change it to suit with the times. But really, if you're hardcore, it's not supposed to change. It's the word of God, and it is what it is. Science is really the exact opposite of that, because science is fluid. It's the search for the truth, but that truth can change at any time based on the most up-to-date research. And so this map really symbolizes that concept for me, because this map was the iPhone of its day. It was the advanced science of its time. It was one of the first maps that showed the entire world, semi-accurately. So this was a big deal when this map was drawn. And a lot of research and thinking and science went into this map. But if you zoom in closely at the map, I don't know if I have it. Well, you can kind of see it. The map is actually completely drawn incorrectly. Let me see. I don't have a, well, you can see if the left-hand side, America, the top of America is completely misshapen. South America looks like Africa is flipped. California in the map is its own island. It's completely incorrect. But that's how science works. We research things, we learn more, we update our findings, and we evolve, and things change. It's not static. So anyways, a lot of the imagery in this painting kind of deals with that. This painting is called "The Animals of Their Own Exist for Their Own Reasons." We're running out of time, so I'll just, this painting kind of deals with how, man's connection and interaction with the animal world or nature. So I'll talk about these tondos a little bit. So as I was making these kind of grid-based paintings using these found images, I was also making these tondos. And in these paintings, they function a little bit different because there is no line of text that begins the work. But the images come from the same, archives that I kind of mine and find imagery in. But in these works, these botanical images, these plants and flowers are flowers from all over the world. So, so you'll have an African orchid sitting next to a Dutch tulip. You'll have a flower from South America sitting next to a plant only found in Australia. It's a melting pot of flora and fauna. And, I was thinking about America and all the things that I love about America, which is that it's this melting pot. There's so many different cultures and histories and belief systems, and they all kind of live together. And it's beautiful. It's what makes me love this country. But it's also that same thing that makes America great is also why there's a lot of, especially right now, there's so many different political opinions and beliefs, and these cultures and belief systems and agendas are constantly colliding, battling, living harmoniously together all at once. And that's why the plants are kind of weaving in and out of each other. It's not like a staged grouping of plants in a pot that's very manicured and orchestrated. It's this unwieldy group of plants that are kind of like creating hybrids, clashing, living harmoniously, and colliding all at once. And entangled amongst these different plants are these different cultural signifiers from all over the world. So like that sunset image is an image that I appropriated from a woodblock printer from the Northwest of this beautiful kind of like American sunset next to this angel from a Persian miniature, next to this illustration that's like a very famous children's book illustration of this book called Pierre. It's the little boy on the lion, next to a Bauhaus poster from, like a very iconic Bauhaus poster. And they're kind of entangled. All these different beliefs and high opinions and different cultural signifiers are kind of entangled in this kind of, I don't want to call it a mess, but a chaotic symphony of sorts. So here's some details of it. And these paintings have collage and paint on them. So some of the flowers are painted and then glued on. And then some of them, and like the bottom right, if you can see that white flower, that's an actual photograph of a flower that I took and then archivally printed it and then collaged into the painting. So there's all these different ways of representation too. There's an abstraction of a flower, a more representation of a flower, a blob that's a placeholder of a flower, then something that's like more rendered. So there's all these different ways of describing and explaining and living in the painting. Here's another one. And again, these are large. These are 6 feet in diameter. And what's nice about these paintings is that if you stand in the middle of it, this void at the center, it's almost as the body, you standing in front of the painting, completes the image. And I did that purposely. I wanted this painting that had this void, this kind of like mysterious emptiness in the center, so that the viewer could kind of almost like meditate on that void and see everything, around the edges. Just some install shots. This is from a show in September. So these are quite recent paintings, just so you can get a sense of the scale. So this is, I guess I'll come back to it. So this is a project I did at the ICA San Jose, which is in San Jose. It's a museum up there, and they've been closed this entire year. And the director of the museum contacted me and asked if I would be interested in doing an outdoor project for the museum on the museum's facade. And she was like, it can be about whatever you want, but maybe it can speak to like what's happening now. This is during all the protests happening. Obviously a lot of political tension, COVID. It just felt like everything was kind of coming to a head around August. And so I started thinking about the show that I had just had with these messages for my son, these kind of life lessons of parables that were kind of woven and kind of concealed in these paintings. And I thought, what would it be like if I took those texts and made a new painting, but had the text be more legible and almost feel like they're written quickly, like on a protest sign, or like as graffiti on something. So in this painting, you see some of the same messages. So they will smile to your face. The animals of the world exist for their own reasons. A borderless world. Remember, my child, nowhere is safe. So on and so forth. Because I imagine people walking by this piece and they most likely don't know anything about art. Maybe they've never been in a gallery or a museum. Maybe somebody's just walking to work. And I wanted the text to jump out at them and slow them down and even maybe confuse them and make them, pay attention to the imagery that's in the work and try to visually connect the dots. And in the window is two Tondo paintings, and dealing with the similar issues as the ones I showed. And the Tondo paintings are called Cowboy and Cowgirl, and they're actually motorized. I don't have a video of it, but they're actually rotating towards one another slowly. They make one revolution per minute. So these Tondos, they're kind of like this, they're kind of like the shape of the earth. For me, they really symbolize America. And I wanted to create the sense of there's no up or down in the paintings. There's no left or right. Everything's kind of tumbling and colliding into one another. And it kind of creates this uneasy feeling as you're watching the painting, it's like slipping away. And for me, that was a metaphor for like what was happening, with trying to get my kid to do kindergarten on Zoom and being scared to go to the grocery store with the election coming up, protests. There's just so many things happening at once. So I really wanted those paintings rotating to kind of capture the uneasiness of the times. And halfway through planning this project, here's the Tondos, so you can see them. Some details. Halfway through planning this project, the museum director came to me and she said, "What do you think about making the museum a polling place for the election?" I guess in San Jose, any business can apply to be a polling place. So that we did that. And so there was this big ad campaign to get people to go out to vote all throughout the city of San Jose with this text that says, "Vote like your life depends on it." That was encouraging people to go and vote, at the ICA. And we had there was a banner campaign, and the buttons were branded with the artwork. And really what we were trying to do is just get people to get out and vote, but also to make, I always wondered, like, why does your polling place have to be in like some elementary school gym, auditorium that's very cold? Well, like, why can't it be in a cultural institution? Why can't you go vote and get to see some art, or, be made to think, or see, get some other added value to it? So, and it was a big success. The mayor of San Jose went and voted there, and we had a line around the block. And I actually think this created a little extra buzz and got people that otherwise wouldn't go vote to go there. So it was a great success. And then I'm just going to show 3 or 4 more paintings from a show that I have currently right now in New York at Denny Dimon Gallery. So this is called Absolute Power Corrupts. This painting is called Better a Cruel Truth Than a Comfortable Delusion. This is big. It's like 7 by 10 feet. This painting is called Dying for Invisible Lines, Killing for Invisible Gods. And this painting is called Never Mind What You've Been Selling, It's What You're Buying. This is 8 by 6 feet, so also quite large. And here is just some installation shots so you can get a sense of scale. And that's it. Thank you.
Excellent.
If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to go back to an image or, answer anything.
All right. Gail says in chat, I'm intrigued by your use of jewelry, sashes, and scarves as intertwining embellishments. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Here, let me. Well, when I go into someone's home, I ask them to show me objects or things that they own that have some sort of connection to them or some sort of meaning beyond just monetary. And a lot of people bring out family heirloom jewelry. And specifically one thing that I noticed was whenever I would paint somebody that was an immigrant to America, they would bring out jewelry and they would say, my mother or I or my grandmother or my great-grandmother, when they came to America, this is the only thing they brought with them from their home country. And because jewelry was a way that they could resell it. Like for instance, when we moved to America, my mom sold one of her rings and we bought our first car. So it has monetary value, but also it's something small. And a lot of times they're family heirlooms that are passed down from generation to generation and something that you can carry on a boat or on a plane with you. So for those reasons, a lot of the jewelry and things like that, because I'm looking for mundane things that everybody has in their home, but that the person has some sort of connection with. And sometimes let me see. I'll go into somebody's house and I will notice something. Like for instance, in this painting with these chocolate eyeballs, it's something that they don't even think about. It's just like, it's a food item. And then I'll just get curious and I'll ask them about it. And then I just find out this whole other aspect about their relationship and how they interact with one another. So when I enter people's homes to do these paintings, I'm part private investigator / archaeologist / stalker. I'm like, can I go in your closet and look around? Can we go in this room? I'm being nosy and asking them. And through that process, a lot of times they'll realize things about the things that they live around. And they'll like, oh yeah, that old blanket that I have is important to me. That's why I didn't throw it away. It's subconsciously, they don't even realize that it means something to them. So yeah. Any
other questions? Juan asks, could you explain more in depth about the meaning behind the painting first-person shooter game? And actually, this is, you could speak to the work in symbols if you could.
Sure, first-person shooter game. So I'll just pull that up so people know what I'm talking about. Let's see. So this is the painting. So this is from a show where I painted the walls, but this is the painting. So for this,
it hasn't switched to the other one.
You can't see this?
I can see the one that you were referring to with the chocolate eyeballs, but not the new one. You might have to stop sharing and start resharing it.
Bring your shared window to the front. Oh, hold on. Let me see. Can you see it now?
Yes, that looks good.
Yeah, okay. So this painting's called First Person Shooter Game. And it's part of there's several paintings including all experiences in art that the school acquired. This was a body of work where, again, I was trying to think of different ways that I could go about portraiture. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I went to, I painted a group of people that I've never met before. I don't know what they look like. I can only go by objects that belong to them. And around that time, I was going to a lot of estate sales, and I was buying belongings of people that had either died, or a lot of times they were elderly and they went into an old folks home and their kids sold their objects. So I picked this, I went to this estate sale listing site, and there was an estate sale call From the Primitive to the Present. And it caught my eye because the title was just so bizarre. And I picked it at random, and I went there at 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was me and like 30 senior citizens, all with boxes ready to shop, you know, the second they opened the door. And I bought as much items as I could from this one family. I didn't know anything about them. I just bought whatever I thought was interesting. So I ended up buying diaries, books, home VHS tapes for like 50 cents a pop, all sorts of random things. And I brought all that material home, and I spent 6 months going through those images and almost working like a private eye, like trying to figure out who these people were, how many members of their family was there, why they had this crazy sale where they were selling their diaries and things like that. So this painting is a painting of the wife who, at the time of the estate sale, had just been put in a nursing home. The husband had died, the wife was in a nursing home, and their kids had sold everything. So in the home, there was a sewing room that the wife would go and do like needlepoint and knitting, and it was kind of like a sewing craft room. And when I went there, I actually bought this needlepoint that was still on the little, I don't know if it's called a loom or on the little round thing that you do needlepoint on. And it had the needle still in it, and it was only halfway done. And it was such a sad object because it was this project that was left undone. Like they carted her away before she could finish this project, you know, and it was very sad. And then I found her diaries from when she was a teenager, and she was in the 50s, she was on a women's basketball team, and she was like an all-star athlete. And and in her diary, she wrote about how she won all these different championships. And she talked about her room being filled with trophies. And I started researching more, and she was actually on one of the first women's basketball teams ever, because it wasn't that common back then. So she really was like a trailblazer. She was this all-star athlete, and, you know, obviously she was very accomplished. And so I wanted this painting where in the background is this very strong figure of this woman holding a basketball, like ready to go, about to make a basket. And in the foreground, there's these two hands, almost like a first-person shooter game, like a video game. And that hand is knitting a basketball net. So I'm connecting basketball to knitting, two things that have nothing to do with each other because of the net. So this is like a good illustration of how my mind kind of works and makes connections between disparate objects in the house. So I start thinking knitting, what's knit that relates to basketball? Oh, basketball net. Okay. Then the hands are making a hoop almost in the foreground. And then I found these dinner bells all over the house. And so the bell is like somebody's like ringing the bell, like the game is about to end. So like the game could be the game of life, literally the basketball game, you know. So really this painting is it's a portrait of this woman, both as a youth and as a senior at the beginning of life and at the end of life. It's a metaphor for all the things that we accomplish, but also all the things that we don't accomplish and we leave behind unfinished. So that's a little bit about that piece.
Excellent. And then Sana would like to ask, can you speak a bit about the size of your works, because they are quite sizable?
Yeah, I mean, I work both small and big, but I do love painting large. And I think there's just something about standing in front of something that's larger than you and you can really immerse yourself into them. But then also my works are very detailed, so I need a lot of space to do all these like very tiny embellished marks. Like I'm a maximalist, so more is always more, like more detail, more patterning, more space. I just feel, and I got into art through graffiti art. So scale was never an issue. I mean, if I had it my way, I would make only 20-foot paintings. Because there's just something about working on this large heroic scale that I really like. But then I also make paintings that are, 8 by 10 inches. So, I mean, that's really it.
Makes sense. Excellent. And then Elise says, thanks for your talk. And returning to the portrait series, the images you use in them are personal to the subject, yet the color palettes you use are all very bright. She wonders if the color palettes are also specific to your subjects or if they say more about you as an artist. And then follow-up question, could you tell us about the different shaped canvases?
Sure. So the color, I mean, most artists are just drawn to a color palette. And even if they fight it, they can't shake it off. It's very hard. Like this painting that I'm showing right here, to me, is very minimal in color. It's a super bright painting, but for me, it's one of the dullest palette color, paintings I've made. And I actually, in this body of work and also in All Experiences in Art, I was actually actively trying to make paintings that weren't super colorful. Even when I try that, the paintings still look really vibrant because it's something that, it's just like built into my DNA. I don't know why. But also, but the color, and there's definitely color choices made based on the objects that I find. But then when I put them together, it all just kind of looks like my work. I mean, I think it's fairly intuitive, but I do a lot of times, if like the fabric that she's covered in right in this painting, that was the pattern on a pillow in her sewing room. So I just copied the colors in that. But I guess I could have, like, if I wanted to, I could have made a dull version of that. But in my paintings, they're very like, everything's kind of keyed up as far as color goes. And one other reason, I guess my paintings are very vibrant is that I'm always thinking about how do you seduce the viewer? How do you take somebody that walks into the room and maybe they don't even like my painting, but they want to get close to it. They want to like put their nose up to it and look at all these tiny little marks that I made. And maybe by slowing them down and kind of seducing them, I get them to fall in love with the work or want to spend more time with it. So I think about that a lot. And I think maybe the scale has something to do with that too. Like I'm always thinking like, how do you stop a viewer and draw them in? Even if they hate painting, even if they, especially Mike, maybe they like only minimalist painting, but I'm trying to figure out a way to make them come closer, even if they don't want to. And then the shapes, a lot of the shape paintings, especially in this series, reflect something that I found in their homes. So for instance, this was the shape of a window that they had in the house. So when I was making a lot of this work, everything about the painting was hyper specific. It was like very coded and symbolic, but everything had a very specific reason. Like I even researched all these trophies. I researched women's basketball trophies from the era that she was playing basketball to make sure that they were accurate. So. And
one last question, the TS in the top left corner.
That was a patch. I found one of her scrapbooks, and she actually had saved the her college basketball team patch, and it was a handmade patch, and it was like falling apart. And so I wanted these two kind of emblems that almost like a yearbook page where they have like different logos or icons of the basketball team. So I like that it was a circle and it kind of mimicked the basketball. So that's why I put them there.
Makes sense. Any other quick questions before we wrap it up? I realize we're over time and some people might need to get to other meetings. Yes, and Elena remarked, what a sad story. They ship her to her home and all that remains of her in her house. So.
Yeah. Well, one other fun fact about that family. So I learned a lot of stuff about them, and the wife was on the Ellen DeGeneres show like 2 months before they had this estate sale. And in their house had tons of crosses, like Catholic crosses everywhere, like the entire, like maybe like 50 crosses. Every room had multiple. And I was like, man, this family must be very religious, very conservative. You know, I started painting this picture in my mind of like who they were and like how they lived their life. And so the wife was on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and I found this clip, you know, because I found out their names and I started Googling. So this wife was on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and Ellen's producer was a student of her husband who had died. And her husband was a English teacher at a Catholic school. And so those crosses were gifts that they gave him every year because it was a Catholic school. So then I was like, oh, okay. And then so I was like, okay, they're really religious, you know, they're still probably really religious and conservative. So during her interview with, like, Ellen had like pranked her, and that's why they were interviewing her. And so they mentioned her husband, he was a teacher, and then they said, you know, she mentioned that he had passed away, and everybody was like, and then they were like, you know, what was your husband like? And she was like, he was a great man. He was so smart and intelligent. He was a great writer and teacher and educator. And then she ended it by saying, and he was even a fantastic lover in bed. This is like an 85-year-old woman. And I was like, what? It's like a completely, like, my idea of this like conservative kind of prop, like I was like, this lady's going on Ellen talking about how her deceased husband was good in bed. I was like, all right, well, she's not that uptight. Like, okay. So, you know, but this is all stuff that work its way into that show, into that body of work. And it's none of that information I would have known unless I started to kind of digging into their lives and different objects. And so, you know, it was interesting.
Excellent. And that exhibition is still up in Ringel Gallery through next Friday, which is Friday, February 12th. So I highly recommend going to see it while it's here. It is absolutely phenomenal in person. So
thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for being here and speaking with us today. I really do.
My pleasure.
And like I said, we will post this on our website once I get it all sorted. So even if you missed part of it, you can catch up. Excellent. All right.
Thanks everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.